It is on, then it's... Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sebastián Gómez, and it is a great honor to serve you as your host for today's event. On behalf of the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, we warmly welcome you to this special gathering entitled Reinventing Learning, How Neuroscience Can Revolutionize Education in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. We extend a respectful greeting to our rector of the Pontificia Universidad Católica, Dr. Juan Carlos de la Llera. We are honored to welcome Dr. Barbara Oakley and Dr. Paula Aguirre, Vice President of Digital Intelligence, as well as the Vice Presidents, Deans, Director of Academic and Administrative Units, faculty members, researchers, students, guests, and all the members of the UC community. Thank you for joining us as we explore how human cognition, neuroscience, and emerging technologies can come together to transform the way we teach and learn. This activity is organized by the Vice Presidency of Digital Intelligence within the framework of AI Academy, our institutional initiative to strengthen AI literacy and foster critical and ethical reflection on the role of AI in education and society. To officially open this session, it's my pleasure to invite our Vice President for Digital Intelligence, Dr. Paula Aguirre, who will deliver the institutional welcome.
Thank you, Sebastián. Thanks, and foremost, thank you, Barbara, for joining us today, for visiting us and giving us the opportunity to hear your talk and to really think about how we address AI and its integration in our university and really learn how we can use it in the most beneficial possible way to enhance the way we teach our students and the way ourselves learn as beings in academia who are trying to constantly learn new disciplines, new topics, and use that creativity to advance research. So really, this comes at a perfect timing at our university and especially this vice rectory, where we're trying to find an answer to these challenges and to see how, in the light of AI and the revolution that it's bringing to universities, to society, and to the world as a whole, to really think about how we can leverage those advances in technology to improve and to strengthen our role as a university. So I'm sure that from your talk, we're going to learn a lot about how really the teaching and learning processes work, and how we can, by understanding those processes better, we can also have some insight into how bringing AI into the process can make it even more valuable. So I'm really excited and eager to hear you, to get ideas from your teachings, and to use all that learning to make our work here at the university better and to give the best possible education process that we can to our students. So thank you very much for being here, and it's an honor, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vice President Aguirre, for your words. It's my honor to introduce today's keynote speaker. Dr. Barbara Oakley is one of the most foremost voices in science of learning. She's the co-creator of Learning How to Learn, the most popular online course in history within 5 million learners worldwide. She's also the author of influential books such as A Mind for Numbers, Mindshift, and Uncommon Sense Teaching. Her journey is as unique as inspiring, for translating Russian in the Bering Sea to teaching abroad, serving the US military, and even working as a radio operator in the South Pole, to becoming an acclaimed engineer and researcher dedicated to help people understand how brain truly learns. Please join me in giving him a warm welcome to Dr. Barbara Oakley. Here.
Very good. Thanks so much. Well, let's see. So I want to begin by thanking Lorena Barba for introducing us and asking me to present here. And I would like to give you a little sense of my own background to start with. I grew up moving all over the United States. So by the time I was about 15 years old, I'd lived in 10 different places. Now, the thing is that mathematics is really sequential. And if you fall off anywhere along the way, it's hard to get back on. Well, when I was 7 years old, I lived in Texas, and I spoke just like this. And suddenly, we moved to Massachusetts, and they were far ahead of me in the multiplication tables. So I just kind of thought, wow, I guess I didn't get the math gene, and I gave up on learning math and science, and I flunked my way through elementary, middle, and high school math and science, which is kind of ironic because I'm standing here in front of you as a distinguished professor of engineering, and I love math and science. And one day, one of my engineering students found out about my sordid past as a math flunky. And he said, "How'd you do it?" And I thought about it. See, this is me. This is me when I was about 10. I loved animals. I love this picture because it's the last cute picture of me. but I loved knitting and weaving. I knew I could never grow up and do anything technical because, couldn't do numbers. But I thought, wouldn't it be cool to learn another language? And, what do they call a person who speaks 2 languages? How about 1 language? You call them an American, right? A U.S. American. So I was like this totally typical U.S. American who spoke only 1 language. And I couldn't afford to go to college and learn another language. But I found out there was one way to learn a language and actually get paid for it. And that was to join the Army. So this is me. I am looking super nervous. I'm about to throw a grenade. And if you knew how clumsy I am, you would know why I look so nervous. But I did learn a language. Completely random, I picked the wrong language. Obviously, I should have picked Spanish, right? Especially because our son-in-law is from Chile, and so our little granddaughter, she speaks both languages quite nicely, especially for a 2-year-old. And I learned Russian. So I ended up working out on Soviet trawlers up on the Bering Sea. It's funny because when my granddaughter hears me trying to speak Spanish, she starts laughing away because I'm so bad. And I have kind of a Russian accent when I'm trying to speak. But I have really good Russian drinking stories. So if, and if I have a little wine, that, some of that wonderful Carmenere, my Russian comes back. I don't know how that works. But anyway, I just loved having new adventures and seeing the world through different perspectives. So I also ended up at the South Pole Station in Antarctica, and that is where I met my husband. So I say I had to go to the end of the earth to meet that wonderful man. And that was 41 years ago. The smartest thing I ever did was say yes when he asked me to marry him. But the thing is, I had done everything people told me to do. I had followed my passion. I'd learned something really well. And then I discovered that, all my colleagues in the military, the West Point engineers, they're easily able to get jobs. And yet, nobody was knocking on my door going, oh, we got to have your Slavic languages and literature skills. So I thought, now, wait a minute. Aren't I supposed to be open to new adventures and new perspectives? Why don't I see if I can try a new perspective of the mind and actually learn in math and science? So at age 26, I went to the university, started at the lowest possible level of remedial high school algebra, and slowly began climbing my way upwards. It was not easy, but if I'd known then what I know now about learning, I could have made it a lot easier on myself. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about learning, how the brain learns, but we're also going to be talking about this new revolutionary era that we're in right now with generative AI. 1,000 years from now, people will be looking right back at this time and saying, that's when everything changed. And so it's changing for us. We're right in the middle of the revolution, and we want to look at how that affects our learning. So one thing that I can do, kind of to introduce this topic of AI, is I'd just like to bring your attention to a study that showed that if you even have a cell phone on your desk, you're a student, you have that cell phone on the desk, and you're looking at it or kind of seeing it, it will actually reduce your cognitive abilities. It makes you dumber. Even just having it on your desk. If your students have it on the desk, they will do that. And then another study has shown if you have your cell phone on the dinner table with you, you don't enjoy your family as much. You don't enjoy the people you're around. You're kind of going, yeah, but, do I have this message? Or, is TikTok more fun? Another study has shown that if you take notes on your laptop, you can type much faster than you can write. And so what can happen is you don't get as much information if you're typing your notes as opposed to handwriting it. So you would want to tell your students to keep those laptops closed and keep those cell phones out of sight. There was a recent op-ed in the New York Times where a professor asked his students to put away the cell phones and the laptop, and guess what? His students got an entire grade on average higher in his course. So, one of the best things you can do as a professor, ask your students to put cell phones out of sight and not to have their laptops open, although they will tell you, I am taking notes. But if you go back around the other side, you will often see it's not notes that they're taking. So I want to, let's move on to AI. I want to give you a 2-minute history of AI. So there's a conference called the Neural Information Processing Systems Conference. This is, it is the biggest conference in AI. This past year, they had 18,000 registrants, and when they opened registration, guess what? After 10 minutes, all 18,000 slots were filled. Now, this paper was submitted to that conference in 2017. It was called Attention is All You Need. Now, my co-instructor, Terry Sanowski, is the president of this conference. Terry told me, when they submitted this paper, we thought it was nothing important at all. The reviewers put it off in a corner to be given by a grad student, and it turns out this paper is so important that it has been cited over 150,000 times because it introduced the idea of the transformer. And the transformer is like the brain of generative AI, ChatGPT's brain. And it has two parts. It's got the encoder, where you put in your prompt, like, what's the best restaurant in Santiago? And then it gives you, out of the decoder, the answer to your question. Now, how these transformers work is absolutely fascinating, but it is not the topic that we'll be talking about today. Instead, what I want to cover is the idea that the flow of information through transformers is remarkably similar to the flow of information through the human brain. And that means if we know a little bit more about how the human brain learns, we can actually use AI more effectively. And if we know more about AI, we can use that human brain of ours more effectively. Interestingly, AI and neuroscience have developed together hand in hand through the summers and the winters of development of AI. And that's because whenever AI experts would get stuck, they would go to a neuroscientist and say, well, how does the brain do this? How does that intelligence work? And then whenever neuroscientists would get stuck, they'd go to AI experts and say, can you model this aspect of the brain? So these two fields are surprisingly closely related. Let's go into how learning really takes place physically in the human brain. So if you look, there's a fundamental building block in the human brain, and that is the neuron. There's 86 billion neurons, and I wish you could see your faces right now. You're like, oh, this is where she gets to the super boring scientific stuff. So let's spice it up a little bit. We're going to use a metaphor for a neuron. And that metaphor can help us understand it much more quickly because it uses our prior knowledge. Although this metaphor is a space alien. So our space alien has 3 legs. Those are analogous to what are called dendrites on real neurons. And then there's these little toes, and the toes are analogous to dendritic spines on real neurons. And lastly, there's an axon, an arm that reaches out, and what it really does is it reaches out and tickles the toe of an adjoining neuron. What this really means is that neurons kind of reach out and they're sending signals. They're mostly electrical. They jump that little gap called a synapse. And what they're doing when you're learning something is that they're just making sort of a little connected group of neurons. And this is whether you're learning how to take a derivative in math, how to conjugate a verb in a foreign language, how to do a dance step or kick a soccer ball or play a musical instrument. Whatever you are learning, you are simply making connections in long-term memory. Now, I had a student, one of my engineering students, he once came marching up to me, and I'd handed tests back, and he had flunked this test very, very soundly. And he marches up, shows it to me, and he says, "How could I have flunked this test? I understood it when you said it in class." In fact, we've gotten so overboard as educators in thinking that, conceptual understanding is the only golden key to learning, that we overlook the fact that if you don't remember what you learned, you really have not learned it. So how do you strengthen those links between memory or between the neurons? Well, you practice, but practice in a specific way. Ultimately, if you don't practice, what can happen is your little sort of synaptic janitor can sweep away those dendritic spines, and then it's like my student. I understood it, but he didn't practice with it. So in the end, we want our students to kind of really practice with what they're learning so they have nice, strong links they can easily pull to mind when they need it. And this is absolutely critical in this day and age of generative AI. You cannot think critically about what you're getting from generative AI unless you have links in your own memory. So in some countries that have adopted what's called constructivist approaches, that students put together their own learning, sounds very good. They have thought if a student simply conceptually understands an idea, that's enough. They can go look up facts whenever they need it. But here's what's happening, for example, in Finland. A Finnish nursing student can type 10 times 10 into a calculator, make a little mistake, get 1,000 out, and they'll say, "Looks good to me," because they have not internalized the multiplication tables. Memorizing, that rote memorization of the multiplication tables gives you a feel for the patterns of the numbers. Again, you've got to have links within your own memory. More than that, I have a friend he's super smart. He's a professor at a university which shall not be named, and he wrote a thriller. So he gives me this book that he wrote with the help of ChatGPT. So excited, 260 pages. I read all 260 pages of this book, and I can say absolutely with great confidence that it is one of the worst books that's ever been written. I mean, it was boring prose, predictable, flat characters. It was just awful. How could this guy do this? I had a good friend, Cormac McCarthy, who was a great writer, and what he would tell me was, to write well, you must read, because that gives you all that background knowledge. My friend has not read a lot. He's very good in his specialty, but not widely read. So when ChatGPT gave him something, he was like, looks good to me. And so again, you can't think critically unless you've got that knowledge within you. I like to say, AI shows, but I'm the only one who knows. Let's say that together. AI shows, but I'm the only one who knows. So that's a very important point. But now, let's go to something completely different, maybe. I want to show you that you have a large language model within your own brain. Now, I had mentioned that we have links of learning, right, when we've learned something. But I was tricking you. I love to trick you, okay? Because actually, it isn't quite that simple. We have two different ways that we can lay those links of learning. And the way we create those links makes a big difference in what those links can do for us. So the first way of learning, working memory is like this. I like to model it with a little octopus, or actually it's a quadrupus. It holds 4 things in mind. So working memory takes in information. It goes through the hippocampus and weakly into long-term memory. That's called the declarative pathway. So right now, you're taking in information. It's going into your working memory, through your little hippocampuses, and then into long-term memory. Are you learning something now? I hope. Okay. So I'm lecturing, but you're learning. Doesn't that contrast with something you have often heard from educators about the best way for people to learn? Let's talk about another way, though, that people can learn. So this is through that automatic pathway of the basal ganglia. So this pathway, I'll show you kind of how it works. So it is, have you ever driven home and you get home and you don't know how you got home? That's that automatic set of links. You have driven home so many times that you've created an automatic set of links, and you just draw on that, and you don't need to be consciously aware of what you're doing. Now, you need both types of links to be able to function and learn effectively most of the time. But I'm going to look at this from a slightly different perspective. So the blue box is that declarative hippocampal pathway. And this orange box is that automatic habitual pathway. Have you heard of the book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow? Okay, so the blue declarative one, that's slow. And this orange one is fast. Okay, so now quiz. Okay, which one am I pointed to? Fast, fast. Okay, slow, fast. Slow. Okay, you got it. Okay. So let us look at what happens. Like, let's say that you are learning, that you're working through a math problem. So you're conscious, or like I learned a little bit of Spanish as an adult. So I'm conscious of when I am trying to say something in Spanish. I have to use it in this declarative system. Or I'm marching through and working a math problem. I'm conscious of what I'm doing. But that other system is really cool. You're not conscious of it. But for example, you can tell yourself, like you want to learn to hit a baseball. So here's what happens. You tell your basal ganglia, okay, hit the baseball, you hit it, and then you see the result, but you are not conscious of how you learned to hit that baseball. You hit it again and again and again, and gradually you get better, but you aren't conscious of that whole learning process. What is the magic behind this basal ganglia system? It is a deep neural net. Each one of these little circles is a neuron, and the line is like that axon going to a dendritic spine, or a dendrite on the next neuron. It's a deep neural net because it has a number of layers. So when I hit that baseball, I'm basically saying, okay, I send a signal, I hit it, and then I hit it again, and then I hit it again, and I'm gradually strengthening some links, I'm weakening others as I'm getting better to hit that, at hitting that baseball. This set of weights is called the value function. Interestingly, your value function actually subconsciously biases how you consciously think about things. That's why two statisticians that might be for or against whatever controversial topic you want, they will read a paper, and if they're for it and that paper supports it, their little value function will say, what a great paper. And they will consciously decide it's a great paper. But if they were against it, their little value function will go, what can I find that's wrong with this paper? So this is a really insidious system. But so it does lots of things, but one of the things it does is it helps you speak your native language. So when like my little granddaughter, she'll go, mama. My daughter will get all excited. She said, mama. And there's this reinforcement training, and that's how you learn your native language. This system is really powerful in infants, toddlers, and younger children. But the older you get, the more this system comes online, and this system goes back. So this is why some great educators of the past, like Maria Montessori, she was like, children need experiential learning. They really learn well that way. And that's true. They're using this. But then she thought that's the best way for adults to learn. It's harder for adults to learn with this system. This is the system for adults. So also of interest, for if you are on the autistic spectrum, you can have an exceptionally powerful basal ganglia automatic system. It allows you to see patterns, but you can't explain the patterns because your hippocampal system isn't as strong. That's the pathway of explanation. So when we tell our students, if you can't explain it, you don't understand it. That's not true, because someone on the spectrum can understand and clearly see the pattern and tell you instantly what the result is, but they can't explain how they do it. Likewise, someone with dyslexia can have a very powerful declarative system, but a weaker basal ganglia system. So they, for some reason, can visualize beautifully. So these are really quite interesting. And what's most interesting is that's very similar to how large language models like ChatGPT are trained. So we've got one in our brain, and it's no surprise. So, but let's see how this applies to learning in the classroom. So this is our experiential, kind of active learning sort of way we learn. This one is the lecture, the explanatory pathway. So we've got lecture, and we've got active student-centered learning. Now, what have you been told over the last 50 years? Lectures, bad. You know, students, you shouldn't be lecturing. Students figure everything out themselves. Is that true? If I had walked in here and in my first half an hour said, okay, I want you to get together in groups and think about what is learning and discuss it amongst yourselves, and then we'll raise your hand, and then would you have learned nearly as much as what you have learned just now? I hope not. But the thing is, so we had, in fact, one of the biggest educational research studies ever done in history found that a mixture of lecture with active learning is actually the best way for people to learn. Should you have a lot of lecture and a little active learning, or a little lecture and a lot of active learning, or should it be equally balanced? You know, it depends on so many things. What's the student's prior knowledge? What age are they? What's the subject matter? But this mixture is called direct instruction. Notice, teachers will say, I've done direct instruction and it doesn't work. They think it's the same as lecture, but it is not. You can clearly see it's not. Now, I'm coming in here and I'm mostly just giving lecture, right? The reason for that is every little bit of active learning you do cuts into the amount of time that I am able to share information with you. So my thought, and this is a reasonable thought on the part of professors, is I'm going to share everything I can with you while I'm here, and then allow you to go off afterwards and actively use and think about these insights. So I do want to mention that largest educational study ever done in history. This one was for younger children, but you will find it's actually the same result for adults. In fact, the Friedman et al. 2014 massive study on what the most effective method was for teaching STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, at university levels was, he said, you should use active learning. But if you go look at their definition of active learning, it was that at least 10% of the class time was using clickers. He could have titled it, do mostly lecture, but a little bit of active, and your students will do better. And that would have been a much more honest way to title that paper. So in this study, it was a 10-year study, cost $100 million, tens of thousands of students, hundreds of thousands of students, tens of thousands of teachers. And here's what they found. Now, this is mid-range, right? I mean, like, if you started the year here and ended the year up here, you've taught something. If you ended up down here, then your students have actually gotten worse over the year. So they compared 9 different techniques, including direct instruction, and here's what they found. Look at this. Look at this. Look at this. Some ways of teaching actually take students backwards. It's amazing. And you know, direct instruction was so far better than every other approach that was used that you know what happened? They never published the study. because all 8 of them went, oh, no. Because they all look bad. So even though they'd agreed on all of this, they didn't want it actually published. So I want to point out an important meta-analysis. Of all disciplines, education is by far the worst in replication rates. That means the number of studies where someone else just goes and sees if they can repeat the results to get the same results. In fact, in education, it's pitiful. 0.13% of education research papers in major journals are replicated. That means if you can get something published, nobody's ever going to check you. And even of these that are checked, guess who does the checking half the time? The doctoral students of the people who did the original study. What are they going to find? My doctoral advisor was really good. So let's kind of see how this relates to what we know about what effective learning actually is. I'm going to give you 4 different techniques for learning, and I'm going to ask you, after I give you the 4, to pick out, to vote for one of them as the very best way of learning. So is it rereading? I did lots of rereading when I was beginning to study engineering. Or is it highlighting or underlining? Retrieval practice or recall, like using flashcards? Or is it creating a concept map? Okay, so get it in your mind. Okay, now we shall do a vote. You can only vote on one thing. How many vote for rereading? A brave soul, a few brave souls in the back. Okay, how about highlighting and underlining? Okay, so we've got a few. How about retrieval practice, like using a flashcard? Okay, some. And create a concept map. So, what is the answer? I have to keep you in suspense. So, the answer is retrieval practice. By far better than concept mapping, because you learn something, but each time you retrieve it, you strengthen those links. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh yeah, but that's good for trivial facts. But higher Bloom's taxonomy concepts, it doesn't help with that. Guess what? It does. In fact, hundreds and hundreds of research studies have shown that retrieval practice is so far ahead of every other method, and they even did retrieval practice of concept maps and found that retrieval practice was much better. See, for one thing, we make fun of simple facts. We're like, oh no, but it's only the higher level that actually counts. But simple facts are critical. In the US, they decided to stop teaching about dates of history because, dates are trivial kinds of facts. You can always look it up. So we have the Civil War in the 1800s with Abraham Lincoln and the Civil Rights Movement in the 1900s with Martin Luther King. Because students didn't learn the dates, they go, Civil War, civil rights, sounds pretty much the same. In fact, Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther King must have been friends. So, and more than that, Michael Nielsen, for example, is a well-known physicist, and what he would do is he would go for a walk each day, and he would retrieve a very difficult theorem that he was trying to understand. He would retrieve it, bring it to mind, try to visualize it, And do you know that over the weeks, as he retrieved every day, he came up with a new way of proving this theorem that was far better than what had been proven with before. So retrieval practice is invaluable. I spend about 20 minutes or so each day doing some retrieval practice. I'm supposed to be an expert in learning. So I will read a neuroscience paper. I'm like, oh man, got this. And I'll remember this. Next morning, I try to remember the key concepts. A lot of it's gone. But if I put it in I like to use something called smarterhumans.ia. And what this will do is I can load a paper and it will create flashcards of the key concepts in the paper. And then I can check the next day. And there's so many good flashcard apps out there, but I get these seemingly trivial facts, and they really help build my conceptual understanding. If I look over the weeks and months and retrieve facts about different papers and key concepts, I begin tying things in a wonderful way. So I am learning at a very, very deep level. Now I want to introduce you to an idea that I call a paradigm cartel. So a paradigm cartel is when groupthink can lock up entire disciplines. So a perfect example of this is Alzheimer's research. Now, my father died of Alzheimer's, so I am really interested in Alzheimer's research. Do you know that Alzheimer's has made no progress whatsoever in the last 30 years? They've made no progress on the disease. Why? Because all the people that give funding, that are the key journal editors, that are the top scientists in the field, all came to the same conclusion, that amyloid plaques were responsible for Alzheimer's. And as a consequence, the whole field was locked up. No one could put forth ideas that had any other approach than amyloid plaques. But what's really interesting is now they've discovered, as it turns out, it seems, that some of the top papers in the field that were used to justify this amyloid plaque approach were falsified. And they were published in top journals like Nature and so forth. So this field was, you couldn't go anywhere if you couldn't get tenure, you couldn't get funding, you couldn't get published if you had any other ideas than amyloid plaques. What's another field that has a paradigm cartel? I would put it to you that it is education. Constructivism is so dominant in education. I remember I went to National Science Foundation and said, I'd like to put forth my proposal of practice and repetition as being helpful in learning math. My program officer told me, don't bother, because that goes against constructivist approaches, and we will not approve it. So there's something called the Flynn effect. The Flynn effect is that IQs have been found to have gone upwards from the 1930s to the 1970s. Researchers went to look. I mean, it's like, people are getting smarter. Why would they be getting smarter? It was because of good education. Exposure to learning really helped them. But guess what's happened since the 1970s? IQ scores have been going down in Western countries only. In Western countries that have adopted constructivist approaches. And so in fact, what they'll often say is they'll say things like, I'm teaching how to learn, and I'm teaching critical thinking. At a university, which I shall not name, I once put forward a new course, and I was asked, would you like to designate this course as a critical thinking course? I said, well, what's your definition of a critical thinking course? They didn't have a definition. In fact, critical thinking is often simply a buzzword, because remember, part of critical thinking means you learn knowledge. You get those facts inside you, and that's how you're able to think critically about whatever you're hearing, or especially getting from AI. Now, do these two tabletops look the same? No, they're trickily designed to look like they're a different size, but I'll show you, they're actually the same size. Just as we can have optical illusions, we can have illusions of helping. In fact, this is one of my areas that I like to study for some pathologically altruistic reason, which is pathologies of altruism. In other words, trying to understand why the road to hell is often paved with good intentions. So I've published an edited volume from Oxford University Press, a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. What I find really is pathologies of altruism are really everywhere, but they're especially common in education. We often just want to do things, that will really help people, and we grab onto an idea and we don't really check to see if it's actually true. What's the biggest example of this? Student-centered learning. I mean, look at this. Look at these wonderful little kids. Students put their knowledge in their own brain, and it's so simple, and the students are all kind of kind and nice and good to each other. Whether you're in elementary school or at a college level, they construct their own knowledge. But this is what student-centered learning really is like. Students don't know anything. That's why they need teachers. In fact, when you go around saying, oh, we use student-centered learning, you know what you're doing? You are demeaning the important, invaluable role of teachers. Teachers, they're not, it's like you're supposed to be the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. But I'm teaching a lot by being the sage on the stage. Sometimes that's helpful. Sometimes it's helpful to be the guide on the side. But we have a new role for teachers in this age of AI, and that is that teachers are guardians of knowledge. Students do not leave your classroom unless they really know the material. We do not want engineers getting out there, they've done most of their homework with ChatGPT, and then bridges fall down, planes crash, doctors kill patients because you haven't ensured that they've got that knowledge inside them. So I do want to make an important point. What if you look at schools of education and how they teach about neuroscience, it's kind of crazy. It's all neuromyths. That's all they teach. Left hemisphere, right hemisphere, you only use 10% of the brain or whatever. It's how bad neuroscience is. And I mean, if we taught math that way, it's like, we taught myths of math or myths of history or myths of biology, we'd never really be teaching any of those topics. So we need to be teaching from schools of education, how does the brain really learn? Unfortunately, there's a really good book that just came out in Spanish that teaches exactly that. So, and I have a copy of this book, and the first question afterwards, I will give that copy of this book to the first question. So, but I also want to bring your attention to, now Nick Gibb, I believe, was here in Chile recently. His book is amazing. It is how he was able to turn a whole country around. And so I highly, highly recommend it. So let's just kind of move into our last little topic here. And this relates to curiosity. Oh, and incidentally, I'm going to share my whole presentation so you'll have a little QR code and you'll be able to download the PowerPoint itself. So don't worry if you miss some of the pictures. So it turns out that curiosity is one way that constructivists got it right. And I want to show you how that takes place. So dopamine is the feel-good molecule, but it's like an anticipatory molecule. We anticipate we're going to, get something that surprises us. Interestingly, dopamine is put out by dopamine neurons in the ventral tegmental area. It goes through the brain, but particularly to the parts of the brain where we're working on something that we're curious about because their professor got them curious. It's kind of intriguing to discover that little mice that get their dopamine systems inactivated cannot learn anything new. So, as it turns out, when you're trying to figure out a problem, well, let's say your professor has got you curious about this problem, but you try to get a solution, doesn't work. So you try again, nah. You keep trying, and ultimately, you finally get a solution. Aha! You feel that really, I got it? What that is, that when you get that, figure it out, and you get it right, dopamine goes right in that track of neurons that you most recently used, and that is how you create those links of learning. So, so how do we provoke curiosity? Ask ChatGPT. So I was in Mongolia. I have to put this picture in because it's like the world's ugliest horse, but he was such an adorable little guy. So the professors in Ulaanbaatar were telling me, we're city people. We don't understand our students coming in from off the Mongolian steppe. How do we teach them and get them intrigued and curious about Python programming? Well, go to ChatGPT, and it will give you ideas about main guard and scope in terms of yurts and migratory patterns and all sorts of things that the students are actually much more familiar with. And that can enhance their curiosity. Now, have you ever gone up with your car, you stop someplace, and then your GPS says, go north? And you're like, which way is north? So often students are like that when you sit them down to solve a problem. So I love an iPhone, for example. If you hold it right, it will show you the right direction. That's kind of what we need to be doing when we're teaching. So if you think about it, we know that we've got those neurons in our brain. They make a connected group when we learn something. And that connected group is part of the greater what is called a schema. That is all the sets of links, in our long-term memory, or even potential links. So if we look at that schema, what happens is this schema, there are 100 trillion potential connections in the human brain. It took thousands and thousands of years, even for millions of people, to figure out the simple concept of the zero. When we sit students down and we say, okay, now you need to actively construct your learning, in their neural high-dimensional space, here's what they're doing. Look, it's like, do I look over in this corner? Or wait, do I look down here? No, wait, up here? Do you want me to connect this or that? It can be really, really confusing. So what should good instructors do? They can, they can ask a question. So if you ask a question or hold a Socratic dialogue, what you're really doing is you're providing a hint. You're narrowing that high-dimensional space into something that's more doable by a student. So look, they're doing sort of hidden Markov searching, and so here they are, they're looking around, trying to figure out what on earth they're supposed to be doing, but it's a much smaller space. And here's the thing, when they finally figure out what you're driving at, they get that little dopamine aha, and they think they're the ones that figured it out, when it actually was your own very careful scaffolding and questioning that reduced that high-dimensional space. So if you look, let us compare. This is memorization. No, you don't get any practice searching around. Memorization can have its place sometimes, but look what happens here. When students creatively are led to putting together something for themselves as they need to, it is incredibly helpful for them in their learning. Now, of course, if students are struggling, you can narrow that high-dimensional space even further. Or, of course, you can have students eventually being able to put together large swaths, see things. But look at this. This is working memory symbolized as it is enhanced by artificial intelligence. You can see things to connect creatively that you never would have seen before due to AI bringing these insights to you. But notice, if you do not have those fundamental links already there in your long-term memory, you can be the most brilliant poet in the world, but if you don't have those links about physics, you're not going to understand when ChatGPT gives you a really intriguing and creative idea in physics. Again, you need to have those links in your long-term memory if you are to be creative even with ChatGPT and generative AI. So as I close, I just want to remind you, student-centered learning actually is important. But you know what? Great teaching matters too. And together, we can put education on a new neuroscientific basis, and ultimately then, AI shows, but I'm the only one who knows. So with that, I thank you very much. And there's lots of, like the paper, the PowerPoint, and everything else.
Thank you, Barbara Oakley, for that insightful and energizing presentation. We will now open the floor for questions and reflections from the audience. If you have a question, you can come upstairs to here. We have a microphone. Or if not, maybe we can lend them to you. So please, you could also raise your hand if you have a question. There.
Was not for the book in any case. My question is about the dopamine, because we know that the threshold what we already have is too high for the student because they are constantly using the cell phone. And when you try to motivate to make this quest, to try to potentiate different questions or try to solve different problems, but the level of dopamine is that high that they say, I pretty much don't care. How do you to make a solution for that? What is the strategy to try to change a different motivation? What is the strategy to solve that?
So, first thing, the idea of dopamine's high all the time is a little bit misleading. Dopamine, like that's what gamblers struggle with. That's what alcoholics struggle with, to get that hit of dopamine. But the reality is that we've had distress. Do you know that, Victor Hugo, the great writer, he used to ask his servant to lock him naked in his room because he was so easily distracted that all he wanted was a pen and paper in his room so he wouldn't be distracted by things. What I want to bring out is our expectations of our students really matter. And they matter a lot more than, whether they're, doing a lot of TikTok and so forth. And so one of the best movies, one of my favorite movies is Stand and Deliver, where Jaime Escalante, who was from Bolivia, he went to Southern California and he was teaching a lot of students who were the children of migrant workers. And the administrators of the school said, these are just poor kids. They have hard lives. They're distracted. They've got other things going on. Just be easy on them. And he was like, no way. I am going to get these students to actually pass it's a advanced calculus test when they finish high school. They're going to finish the AP calculus test. And so his administration was like, oh, you can't do this. It's not going to be. So unlike the movie, in the movie, he did it in 1 year. It actually took him 3 years. But what he was doing was he was inspiring and motivating his students. And this brings me to Botox. So, which is clearly related to this. So you inject Botox because it takes away the wrinkles. And the way it takes away wrinkles is wrinkles develop about where you frown. And Botox paralyzes those muscles. So if you have Botox injections, you can't frown. And what they found, and so your wrinkles go away. But what they found was that people who had Botox injections were happier. And they thought, what the heck? Where'd this come from? Well, they're happier, but the reason for that, it turns out you think that your mind controls how your face looks, your facial expression. But your facial expression also controls how your mind thinks and feels about things. So when you can't frown, you start to be happier. And this kind of thing actually happens as well to your students. What is on your face is mirrored through a system in your students' brains called the mirror neuron system, which is a complex system. But like if I'm going like this, inside your brains, the motor neurons affiliated with this motion, they're actually firing in your brain. And this is how you help students to understand like ideas and to also get them excited about what you're excited about, because their brains will get excited too. So I had my first class that I ever taught at the university. I was I was assigned to teach electrical circuits. And half of my students were electrical engineering students, and they wanted to be there. And the other half were mechanical engineering students, and they didn't want to be there at all. They wanted to just go out and play with engines. So they would all sit in the back, the mechanical engineering students, and they'd like throw paper airplanes, and just. So I put it in my head that by the end of the semester, all those mechanical engineering students would convert to electrical engineering. And do you know that after a couple of semesters, I got in trouble with the mechanical engineering department because so many of these students were converting, to electrical engineering. So the big thing we want to get our students excited about what we're teaching. You use those hooks, help them develop curiosity about whatever you're teaching. Great teaching really matters, and it's not so much, okay, my students already have too much dopamine. No, that's not the deal. What the deal is you want to help them learn to focus, and part of that means no cell phones in my class, and start getting them and tell them about some of the research related to, how if you don't even enjoy your friends as much if you have that cell phone in view. And we want to be, it's our job now. We've never really had to do this before, where we tell people, put your phones away, write by hand. But it's okay to do that and be really kind of a little bit, this is the way it is in my class. And then when you're telling a student this, and let's say they'll look at you like, are you really serious? And yeah, I'm really serious. And don't walk away until they do it. So, you want to be, you have to be an enforcer at least a little bit. You set the rules at the beginning of your class. Students will have expectations, and it will make your whole class a lot better. So it's your expectations and your ability to teach. All that other stuff will go to the side, and they can get really interested because you're fascinated and you're getting that excitement within them too. And you totally deserve that book. That was a great question.
Hello. Hello, thank you for the presentation. And I want to ask you if everything you have talked about works in an environment of 120 students of first year, because, everything you have said and the last example may be more particular to smaller courses. I don't know, but what do you do if you are facing a classroom full of small children? They're just gotten into the college, university, and maybe they don't know where they're going to exactly. I don't know, just to ask your experience, because there are lots of courses here that are very massive, you can say. How can you apply everything you said, but being just an individual in front of that young audience, large audiences?
So I've taught large classes of hundreds of students who were introductory. And, you know, it's, you got to go in there and you got to be really confident and certain of yourself. But everything, if they know that you are really there to help them be successful, they will end up loving you. So all you can do is go in, you're teaching your subject, but one thing you might want to do is like give them a few little hints about how they can learn more effectively. Show them that retrieval practice. Also, if you take my course, Learning How to Learn, which I think you can take for free, Terry's in my course, it has just dozens of little clues. And what you can do as you're teaching is you can be giving them clues about how they can learn effectively. One thing that I used to do is just sort of the old teacher trick. When students go, yes, but is this going to be on the exam? You know, I'm like, great, that's a teachable moment. Because I go, yes, it will be. In fact, students often miss that question because of blah, blah, blah. And they're listening and taking notes. Isn't that what we want? You know, that they're really learning that way? So, you know, just going in, if you go in and you're kind of like, well, what do you guys really want? You know, they're gonna eat you alive. but I do have to say that if a student doesn't know why they are at the university, they shouldn't be paying tuition to be at the university. So, you know, we have 2 adopted sons from Kosovo. They were refugees. And, you know, they kind of thought, well, we got American parents now. We can kind of be more like American kids. We can take a couple years and figure out what we really want to study. I was like, okay, guys, you've got relatives still back in Kosovo. You don't have time to be messing around for a couple years trying to figure out what you want in life. You know, people are depending on you. Figure it out. And they figured it out very quickly. And now one has an MBA and the other has a PhD in engineering. So I'm, you know, very proud of them. But I also so our younger son, he would, so his older brother ratted him out. He said, he's not studying. He's doing really bad in school. He's coming home and he's just watching television. So I talked to Bufty. I said, oh, Bufty, no more watching television when you get home from school. That's study time. Come home the next day, he's watching television. So I took my old electrical snippers out and cut the plug off the back of the TV. There was no more television. And Bufty did really well. So, yeah.
Thank you once again, Barbara Oakley, and thank you to all participants for engaging in this important conversation about the future of learning. On behalf of the Vice Presidency for Digital Intelligence, we invite you to stay connected with AI Academy and to join upcoming activities that continue promoting innovation with purpose and a human perspective. At this time, we invite you to continue this conversation over a coffee break located outside this room. Have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you so much for being here.